Well, welcome back to our video series on the 10 Commandments. We are now going to be looking at the 7th commandment this week, which is you shall not steal. And we'll have 2 more videos after this to follow up on the last 3 commandments. So you can continue to tune in and check out those. But for today's commandment, as with this whole string of series we've been looking at, well, how does this really invite us into a freedom in our life together? And so we began this series looking at, the freedom we're invited into with relationship with God, and how that frees us from perhaps other types of idols and binding relationships. And now we're looking at, well, how do we truly live together as people who honor one another's freedoms and embrace the goodness of life that God has given us in the ways God calls us to live. So you shall not steal. This is one where we kind of all think, oh yeah, I got that one. Got it down. I'm not taking anything of someone's that doesn't belong to me. I'm not snatching things off my neighbor's property or...
I'm not shoplifting at the CVS.
But we wanted to start with Luther's Large Catechism, and his description of this commandment is that it means to not take advantage of our neighbors in a way that results in their loss somehow. And I find that to just be a really kind of staggering expansion of this commandment beyond this concept of taking physical property or financial property from someone, but not taking advantage of people in any way that could result in their loss. So we're going to be unpacking, well, what are some of the ways in which we might be doing that today, and perhaps haven't thought about it in light of this commandment of not stealing from one another.
And we also, like we're doing with all the commandments, we want to put this in a more positive spirit. And so, the positive side of this commandment is how do we promote the welfare of our neighbor and even help them to secure what belongs to them, help them to secure what might be their physical property, but even to help them secure those more personal things that, we own as human beings. I mean, we want, and I think this is a good definition of generosity. Generosity is really just promoting the welfare of our neighbor. I mean, that's essentially what generosity is seeking to do.
And that really helps us understand how this commandment is so vital to the Christian spirit we live by, right? I mean, this isn't just something that's good to do, but this is actually integral to how we live as Christians in the world. That, it's not only about what we don't do, it's also about how we help to build up and support our neighbors.
Because maybe we steal from our neighbor because of what we have failed to do.
Absolutely.
Not actively promoting what is good for our neighbor is in a backdoor way, maybe a way that we actually steal from each other.
Absolutely. It could be.
So, well, I think it would be helpful just to maybe go through some specific examples for this. Because, I think as far as stealing on many different levels, that's kind of an easy concept. But I think, what are just some real practical ways that we steal in a whole host of ways?
And maybe don't always think about in that light or
framework. We don't think of it as stealing, but maybe it is.
So, the example that's really close to home for me is student interest rates. My student interest rates are at 6.8%. It's just outrageously high.
Higher than a mortgage.
For
now.
And this is something, when we think about promoting our neighbors' welfare now and into the future, well, we want to encourage people to go to school, right? And we don't want to saddle them with debt going into the future. And that's going to be, that's one of the biggest issues now facing my generation and younger generations is student loan debt. And so there's a way in which, having just exorbitantly high interest rates is taking advantage of people who, maybe don't have a lot of options for getting an education. And it's going to have harmful effects for them for quite some time down the road.
And if we really zoom back, I think your example is how a generation is stealing from the younger generation, stealing from the future in order to fund the present.
Yeah.
And that's, this commandment says don't do that.
Yeah. And it's similar, similar thinking with why Christians have always, often have opposed things like payday lending. It just, it takes advantage of people who are in a vulnerable position, who don't have a lot of options necessarily, and kind of robs their future at the same time. So, yeah.
Also, plagiarism. Talking about college, it's a big
very
deal.
Important lesson to learn.
That when you cite your sources, that even the idea that we don't want to steal someone's idea, that we want to give credit, we want to promote the person that came up with that idea. It's good. It's good for our society. It's good for us personally. It's good for the person who came up. That we recognize that they had this really good idea, and we want to cite and recognize them for that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. Other examples.
Identity theft, is that's a big thing. So much of our life is, on the internet, and we put a lot of our, numbers and names and, and we have to fill the stuff out to have access to an account or something, but that stuff can be stolen. But even beyond kind of the technical, parts of it, we have, we have an identity, there's parts of our self as humans, that we want to protect. And we don't want to, and we might not be stealing it, but we might be not promoting it.
Yeah.
And I think that this commandment is calling us, to proactively, try to do that in certain ways.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. I think another way in which we think of this commandment in this country is in terms of, rights, and how do we protect and build up one another's rights. And one of the big awarenesses in the last couple of years has been around who has access to voting, and how do we build up other people's voices, the use of their voices, by making sure that people have access to voting.
Yeah. So not only do we want to not steal, but we actually want to promote and protect that everyone is ensured having access to something as sacred as voting. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, I think normally we think of this commandment in terms of our own personal behavior, but again, I think it's so helpful to zoom out and really kind of try to ask the question, what are the big systemic ways that people steal from other people? And actually, Martin Luther does a very good job of that.
It's pretty fiery on this part.
And humorous and verbose, and, as Martin Luther has, but this is directly from the Large Catechism. Martin Luther writes, in short, thievery is the most common craft and the largest guild on earth. This was 500 years ago, but he might as well be talking about the 21st century.
Yeah.
If we look at mankind and all its conditions, it is nothing but a vast, wide stable of great thieves. These men are called gentlemen swindlers. Yeah, so, wow. Or big operators. Far from being pickpockets and sneak thieves who loot a cash box, they sit in office chairs and are called great lords and honorable good citizens, and yet with a great show of legality, they rob and steal. This applies, to, big corporate executives and politicians here in our country. Martin Luther just calls it out right there. And look how that hurts our society. When that kind of thievery happens, are we a more free people? No. I mean, this commandment is to ensure that we live with more freedom. Because if we're going to be free, we need to trust each other. And a way that we build up trust with one another is we promote the welfare of our neighbor, and we actively seek to protect what is our neighbor's. And we want our neighbor to enjoy everything that they have.
Yeah. Yep.
We don't, and maybe even competition. We don't even want to be in competition with our neighbor. I mean, there's really kind of this sense that I just really want to be generous, and I want to celebrate and protect everything that you already have.
Right. Yep. Yeah, Luther speaks to that too. He says, we are obligated faithfully to protect our neighbor's property and to promote and further their interests, especially when it comes to money, wages, and provisions for doing so. But, again, it's going back to that deeply Christian impulse in this commandment that's about building one another up.
Yeah. So as Jesus does, Jesus spends time in the Sermon on the Mount, with, you shall not kill and you shall not commit adultery. And Jesus really expands that. Jesus doesn't specifically mention you shall not steal, but I still think it's a good spiritual exercise to expand this wide enough so that we reflect on those ways in our own life, and not just how am I being stolen from, but how am I maybe stealing from someone else. And maybe it's not stealing their money or stealing their things, but maybe I'm stealing time from another person. Maybe I'm stealing time from my employer at work. But also to think of it in terms of how do I participate in a much larger system that maybe the part in the system that I play is, the system is stealing from me where I sit in the system. Or maybe I am a part of the system where I am benefiting from others being stolen from. And so I think there's a lot of good soul searching and reflection for us to do on this kind of confession and forgiveness. And that's the beautiful thing about grace and forgiveness, that we're free to make this kind of examination of our life. And we don't have to have a perfect scorecard with God. We can be completely honest and say, oh, I'm so sorry that I participated in this stealing. I'm sorry, help me. I don't want to do this anymore.
And I think too, when we can see this beyond the individual, that this isn't just individual transactions, but this is about community, that helps us understand how this is truly more a part of our freedom as God's people. That, if we could envision a society in which there really was a covenant around honoring one another's property and honoring one another's personhood, and if we could really trust in that covenant, how different would that make our world, where, we didn't, we look in our communities today and we can see that, we all experience fear around, what if someone else tries to take what I have? So the freedom in being able to live in a community where this sort of covenant is practiced, well, it would be a very freeing thing.
I know. I want to live in that kind of in a free community and trusting one another. Well, thank you again for joining us for this commandment series video. I hope that you've learned some things. If some questions have come up and you want to talk more, please leave a comment. If you like this video, like it on YouTube. If you are part of our Mountain View community and you're enjoying these videos, Pastor Bree and I, we want to talk with you. We want to hear, what is your experience? What are you learning? What more do you want to talk about, that these commandment videos have sparked? So find us on Sunday morning or Yeah, we want to continue the conversation. So join us again for our next video, which will be on the 8th commandment, one that I think we need to pay a lot more attention to today. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. So we'll see you next time.